to the Politics of Survival, and thank you for following me on all these different platforms. You can find us on Rockfin, Rumble, X, Twitch. What am I forgetting? Anyway, you can find us everywhere. So follow us. You can find out more information, of course, about me on my Telegram, Tara Reade. And, you know, a lot of times I'll be posting things on X, and sometimes I even do spaces like tonight. I'm going to be with Rhoda Sterling, who is the CEO of Due Process International. She specializes in helping people that have been tangled up with the US government and been placed on Interpol and how to get off Interpol. She has a lot of really good advice about that. And she helps with PR crisis and a lot of other things. And she's helped my case for the last year. And so we're going to be talking about the weaponization of DOJ, FBI, of the Interpol, and the latest in my case. And we're going to be doing that at 11 p.m. Moscow, 4 p.m. Eastern time, and 1 p.m. Pacific. And that's, I think, GMT. It's 3 hours before 11 p.m., so 8 p.m. So yeah, I'm getting pretty good with the time zones. But check us out on Spaces on X Live, and you can ask Rhoda questions because she has some really good pointers if you find yourself in a tangle, which I did. And she was an invaluable help to me. So we'll be doing that. And as you know, I have a very important guest coming up today, whom I really am looking forward to talking to. But before I delve into that, I wanted to say a couple of things about recent events that are going on. You know, as you all know, I was in Sochi, Russia, and they had the youth festival, which was amazing. There was over 188 representatives from different countries all over the world. It was very unifying. It was very gratifying. It was just very innovative and such a spirit of happiness there, as all the young people were gathering, and older people were gathered, and kind of in a united vision to try to find ways to build coalitions and bring together ideas from all different political spectrums and religion and cultures. It was really fascinating. And Sochi is such a gorgeous place anyway. So that was really fun. And that's where I met the guests that I have on tonight. And we're in the middle of now the elections. It is the election in Russia. I am not allowed to vote because I am under political asylum. I wish I could vote, but I cannot. However, I will be voting in the US election, so watch out. I will be able to vote absentee, and believe me, I will. And it will not be for Joe Biden. So I'm not into endless wars, and as you all know. But I wanted to talk about something that's happening in America right now that's really endangering our free speech again, and our constitutional rights of freedom of expression and freedom of speech, and that's the TikTok ban. Now, it's kind of a Trojan horse because they're pretending it has something to do with China. It has nothing to do with China. It never had anything to do with China. It has to do with control. It has to do with trying to control the narrative of the military-industrial complex and the intelligence communities that manipulate it. If this has passed the Congress, if this passes the Senate and is signed into law, the way the bill reads, the language is so vague, they can not only shut down TikTok. They could shut down X, or what was formerly known as Twitter. They can shut down any other kind of app. They can shut down websites. They can, in other words, anyone who's in political opposition. So it's just sort of another back way to control information and censor and suppress. Now, if you want to know more about this, Mint Press News has done a lot about this. Michael Schellenberger, Matt Taibbi have done a lot to really show how the NGOs in America, funded by Soros and by other billionaires, are trying to suppress and get rid of, basically, our freedom of speech. So check those out and pay attention, because, you know, it's our life, right? And, so there's that going on. And if some of you have been paying attention, you know that I wrote a tweet. It was one of my rage tweets because I was pissed off about E. Jean Carroll. E. Jean Carroll had DM'd me years ago in support of me. And then now she's supporting Joe Biden, and had gotten some huge settlement after accusing Trump of rape. And I don't want to get into the veracity of her claims. That's not, I'm not an investigator. That's not my deal. But what made me angry was the hypocrisy. And her lawyer, Roberta Kaplan, was one of the founders of Time's Up, who basically went after the Cuomo survivors and myself to smear our reputations, and that's on record. It was so blatantly corrupt and a catch and kill that Time's Up had to be dismantled. So really the Democrats just reek of hypocrisy. And so you saw this conversation went on with George Stephanopoulos, with him attacking Nancy Mace, who is voting for Donald Trump. And she is a rape survivor, and he was attacking her for her political choices. So I weighed in and on this, and ended up in the New York Post. Megyn Kelly also spoke about me on her show and reminded George that I exist, even though they try to suppress me. And then in 1993, I actually did file a report with the Senate that Joe Biden has sealed in the University of Delaware, that no one's been able to see. There's also a police report, and there's never been an investigation into Joe Biden, but instead I have been dragged through the media, had my reputation destroyed, a wrecking ball to my life, to the point where I had to seek shelter in another country. So you compare my treatment with E. Jean Carroll, who was given a Vogue cover and close to $1 billion, and a billionaire funding her legal, things. That's the difference between when you accuse a Republican and when you accuse a Democrat, I guess. And what's dangerous about that is that it makes sexual assault weaponized as a political weapon, used both ways. And it's wrong, because it shouldn't be viewed that way. It isn't that way. Sexual assault crosses all socioeconomic and political lines, and it's egregious. So I spoke out again, and I have challenged George Stephanopoulos to an interview. He has not yet responded. And George, I do know him back in the day, because he worked for Clinton. He was one of the people smearing, the Clinton accusers. I knew George Stephanopoulos through, those circles, because I was in, the Democratic circles at that time as a young person. So it's interesting now to see how everything's played out. So that's kind of what's going on. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the spaces later on, but now I want to get back to tonight's show, which is really special to me, because I met this representative from the Great Britain Workers' Party, Jesse Williams, who is here to talk about their party, the galvanization of the work that they're doing in Great Britain, and also the elevation of George Galloway. He's back, he's in Parliament, and it's a wonderful thing. So without further ado, let me introduce Jesse Williams. Jesse.
Zara, thank you very much for having me. It's good to see you again.
It's good to see you. So, my audience, it has very different interests. They don't probably know much about what's going on in Great Britain. I do have some English fans, so there are probably some people from England and Ireland that are watching right now. But one of the things that everyone's asking is, where's Kate Middleton?
Well, I'm tuning in from Birmingham, but my family do live in Sussex, so I should know. I've never seen her around, so it must be a very different part of Sussex she's from. I actually don't even know if she's ever been to Sussex, but there you go. Oh, I know. Sorry, it's the other ones who are the Sussex. It's Harry and Meghan.
Very intriguing, and as you know, Americans are always fascinated by what's going on with some of the royals, but not us Irish. We don't give a shit. And it's St. Patty's weekend, so we're in a different celebration mode. But yeah. I wanted to compliment you on the work that you did at the youth festival. I saw you connecting with a lot of people. I saw your RT interview. Could you talk a little bit about like what you're doing with the Great Britain's Workers' Party and kind of educate people about it in general?
Sure. So I suppose going back to our origin story, I was a member of the Communist Party before I joined the Workers' Party, and it was actually the sort of Communist Party and George Galloway, group and other groups of socialists that kind of came together because we understood that we desperately need a such strong socialist and anti-war alternative in British politics to combat the Labour Tory or Labour and Conservative two-party system. So the politics in Britain is very similar to that in America. It's very deadlocked. So just as in America, you have the Democrats and we'd have the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, and I think you know have a similar problem in America where a lot of socialists and left wingers constantly say, well, we need to get the Democrats in so we kick out the Republicans. And unfortunately, it is that very cupped attitude of the British left to say that we need to support the Labour Party, a party that has routinely betrayed the interests of the class and waged imperialist wars abroad, because we need to kick out the Tories. But then therein lies a
They're more
problem.
neoliberal. So what you're saying is like the
Yeah.
neoliberals, kind of like the Democrats, the liberal Democrats in the United States.
That's exactly it. It is a political deadlock of neoliberals, where there's no point in kicking out the Tories because actually Labour are the main obstacle for truly independent working class politics in Britain.
I see. And as far as you're concerned with Tories, like you see the different uh, conversations that are being had about Gaza, about Ukraine, and about the damage that that's doing to the economy of Great Britain, as well as Europe in general. And also, of course, the human carnage and the tragedy of all of that. And it's all being fueled, right? Are there any Tories or any conservatives that are speaking out against the war or anti-imperialism, or is it only coming from one faction of the political base in Great Britain? What is your read on that?
I mean, the Tories are unanimous in their support for Israel and Ukraine, and unfortunately, so too is the leadership of the Labour Party. Now, for the Labour Party, you do have some outliers in where you have Labour MPs representing highly sort of Muslim and Asian nations in Britain, and they cannot be seen to be kowtowing to Israel too much. So they need to pay lip service to the rights and the ambitions of the Palestinian people. Um, However, even those MPs are very much whipped into line by the Labour leadership. Unfortunately, you know, our parties are very much united on these foreign policy questions, and that's why, you know, I mean, we might be talking about this a bit later, but you know, having George Galloway elected as in Rochdale is so important, so that we are getting truly genuine anti-war and anti-imperialist views in Parliament.
And George Galloway gave a very eloquent speech lecturing actually American lawmakers about Iraq back in the day. It's legendary. His anti-imperialism, his anti-war stance has been very firm for a very long time. He's also been very outspoken about Julian Assange and about the importance that Julian Assange should be let free. You know, I really admire George. I've been on his show a couple of times, as you know. So one of the things, you know, kind of observing from far away, physically far away, is what got my attention is that he won resoundingly. And what that tells me is that people are really tired of what's going on in Great Britain. And you have a prime minister who's not even elected. And I don't know if many Americans know this, but that he was not even elected. He was appointed. Could you talk a little bit about the mood you're seeing in your community, as well as, you know, Rochdale, but also Birmingham and so on?
Well, absolutely. I think, I mean, I have to say that it's incredible that the Prime Minister had the audacity to completely slander Galloway's landslide victory. George didn't win. He absolutely smashed the elections. And that's because when I was up there campaigning in Rochdale, knocking on people's doors, it wasn't only Asians and Muslims who, you know, you'd argue would have more skin in the game when it came to the question of Gaza, but actually, you know, there were plenty, you know, middle class white people who voted for George Galloway. You know, on the one hand, because you know they too, you know, sympathise with the suffering of the people in Gaza and stand against the genocide. But there's a real appetite in this country for serious change. I mean, my own mother, who routinely votes Conservative, said that if she were, in Rochdale, she'd vote for George Galloway. So, all across the board, people are really hungry for change, and people who, a few years ago would have never even given George the time of day, would have hated him, but they never really know why. And actually, when the system really exposes itself, they question more things and they say, well, actually, let's give people like George Galloway a chance. He's never changed his message or his orientation. So maybe he's onto something. Maybe he's telling the truth. And that's what we always say. You might not always agree with what Galloway says, but he really means what he says and says what he means. And people are looking for that level of statesmanship in politics in this country again. And we're the perfect party to deliver that, in my opinion.
Well, it's interesting because he's so eloquent in what he says and also so amusing. He called it was correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to get the quote wrong. But he called Rishi the one side of two cheeks, but do the quote because I can't.
Okay, so he describes quite accurately how the Labour Party duopoly in Britain are literally two cheeks of the same arse. And unfortunately, we're seeing a new party, a right-wing populist party, the Reform Party, come out of the fray. But unfortunately, this may be an arse with three cheeks that we're looking at here, Tara. And the best thing is that George gave both, or maybe all three of those butt cheeks a good spanking, as he said word for word in Parliament. It's not parliamentary language, but people aren't looking for parliamentary language. They're looking for someone who can call a spade a spade. So it's a really refreshing, a breath of fresh air in politics. People are looking for that. Not only is George Galloway honest, not only is he politically correct, not in the woke sense, in a genuinely honest sense, but he sounds good. People love listening to him. He has millions tuning into his mother of all talk shows, because people all over the world want to hear his message. He's a British patriot. He really loves Britain, but he's also a man of an internationalist standing. He was good friends with Yasser Arafat, the head of Fatah and the Palestinian resistance in the West Bank. Fidel in Cuba, they had a friendly relationship. So Galloway, people from all walks of life love George Galloway and want to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, it's been really good to see him come back into where I think he belongs. I mean, because we need his voice more than ever. I mean, it's been, unfortunately, anti-imperialist and anti-war voices have been drowned out mostly in Europe and in America. So it's hard, right now, in fact, in the United States, I can't say there's one candidate that's really truly anti-war. There's not one. And that's really, really scary when you think that $1 trillion of the US budget is going to the military. So where are they going with that? They're going to end us in a world conflict without a doubt. And the rhetoric against Russia, as you know, is probably the worst it's ever been. It's been the worst that I've seen in my lifetime. And when I was a child, we were indoctrinated that Russia was bad. It's like they've frozen Russia in the 1990s when the Soviet Union had fallen and there was food shortages and there was problems. And that's how even Great Britain, which is, in proximity, like you would think that some tourists would know differently, like know that that's not true, but they still see Russia as like this backwards country. And it's so odd. So a lot of times people will ask me, do you have enough food? Are you okay? And I'm like, what are you talking about? The food is great here. It's better. They outlawed pesticides, outlawed GMOs. It's healthier. So I don't know, like, give me your impressions because you came to Russia. What was your impression of it?
Well, I suppose I didn't really want to make too sweeping a judgment, as I only went to Sochi. I only went to that sort of Olympic resort. Um, but goodness me, Tara, I fell in. I literally went to the country and I fell in love with with Russia. I am being targeted by the Daily Mail actually for having gone there and professed my love for the country. But I'm like, well, so be it. I'll shout it from the mountaintops that I love Russia. I mean, the people there are firmly patriotic. They have such a spirit about them that I just don't really think we're seen in Britain anymore. People have become a lot more resigned, cynical. They're not. We don't feel that kind of patriotism and respect for the heritage, respect for traditions that the Russians have, and I feel like Britain would be a much better country if we restored that national spirit. So that I mean that's probably one of the biggest thing that struck me about Russia and the Russian people. But yeah, I mean materially, with the sanctions, I'm sure some belt tightening had to happen, but yeah, from what I heard, both in Britain and in Russia, they're not doing too badly. I mean, they're doing a damn sight better than the people in Britain and Germany, where we have extraordinary, vast swathes of energy resources being totally cut off from us because of this stupid bloody war. We've sanctioned ourselves in isolation through these sanctions against Russia. We now have a crippling cost of living crisis that could be ended overnight if we pushed for negotiations with Ukraine and Russia. I mean, we could really end this war tomorrow, I think, if there was a political will to do so.
Well, in 2022, that almost happened, didn't it? But Boris Johnson, your former prime minister, stopped it.
I mean, and that's a really important point, right? Like if we had the power to continue that war, then surely we also have the power to end it. I mean, Britain, Germany, we're close neighbors to you. We're closer neighbors to the Ukraine than the US. In fact, the US uses the UK as one of its primary hubs to get into Europe and extend NATO influence in Europe. If we had a government with the conviction and love for Britain to actually say, no, we're not going to be hosting your military bases anymore. We're not going to be hosting your missiles. We're our own country. We're going to pursue our own independent foreign policy. And I mean, we could totally cripple America's ability to impose its will upon Europe. And that's a big platform in our party is that we want, the whole reason we voted for Brexit to leave the European Union was to charter our own course, become the masters of our own destiny, control our own foreign policy. And this is what I say to people who support the Reform Party. What on earth is good is there to leave the European Union if we're only going to kowtow America straight away after? We left the European Union because we want Britain to determine its own foreign policy, not be isolated. We want to be with friends with as many people as possible, but we want to make decisions in our own national interest.
Yeah, exactly. And it must be very frustrating to see Britain kind of basically be a lapdog and the intelligence services to be they're kind of like a blob with the CIA, MI6 and MI5. And well, I think you throw Mossad in there as well. But I wanted to ask you too about just the last couple of days, the rhetoric coming from France. Well, we all know that Macron is very angry about what happened in Africa. He's angry at Russia because they basically got booted, from parts of Africa. So he's kind of his rhetoric has really escalated, and he's talking about sending troops. He's talking about, and this will have a direct impact on Great Britain. So, what are your thoughts on when you hear that rhetoric from like Macron, the neighbor of France, and then also from your own prime minister talking about conscripting and having soldiers again going?
If Macron were to send French troops to fight the war in Ukraine, think of what it was like when the Gilets jaunes marched through the streets of Paris. Take that and imagine it to be 10 times bigger. That's what I think would happen if Macron were to send troops to fight Ukraine's war. I think it would lead to his total overthrow. I think a big reason why the French, a large section of the French population are supporting the National Rally Party under Marine Le Pen is for a similar reason why the British voted for Brexit, is they want France to become the masters of their own destiny, and not just supporters of Le Pen, but also with Mélenchon in La France Insoumise. So we're seeing the rise of both right-wing populism and left-wing populism in France. But what ties those both together is that both of those people went on the Gilets jaunes protests because they're French patriots. They want France to make decisions in their own national interest. If Macron really wanted to rebuild his popularity uh, and to rebuild a relationship with the French people, he would play his role in promoting peace between Ukraine and Russia and promoting trade with mainland Europe and Russia to end the cost of living crisis with his own people. That I think would be Macron's only way out. But unfortunately, he's not going to do that. His political persuasion is so warped. It's so embedded with the neoliberal establishment. So yeah, I think we're going to see the fall of Macron very soon, and it's not going to be a very ceremonious fall.
Oh, I see. What about your own prime minister in Great Britain? Do you see him losing consensus and losing power very soon, or is he getting a foothold more into his position?
It's a tough one, Sarah. I mean, as optimistic as I am in the next couple of years, the Labour, it's going to take time for the political stranglehold over our country to dissipate. We are seeing it happen in leaps and bounds ever since Rochdale. No, I mean, not had George Galloway won Rochdale, but we had a Conservative member of Parliament, Lee Anderson, defect to the Reform Party, and again, it is a shame that the Reform Party are kowtowing the establishment's foreign policy. But again, it's indicative of an app to tear that two-party system down. But unfortunately, just that having that will is not enough. We need real organization. We need real graft to change politics in this country. It will happen. It's just going to take time and it's just going to take effort. But we're making fantastic progress, and I am very optimistic about the years to come. It's looking like Keir Starmer, in charge of the Labour Party, is going to win this next election. Not for, I mean, I wouldn't take that for granted. The Tories are usually quite good at playing a wild card to winning, but yeah, it is going to be Tory or Labour in the next that are going to win the next general election. But in a sense, those two parties are going to lose massively because there are new political forces in Britain that are putting up a real fight against the establishment.
Well, what's interesting to me too was the tipping point of seeing the British people really kind of turning. Now, of course, it was winter, so the Ukraine war had an impact on energy. So, and I saw some tweets from the Great Britain Workers' Party. If you follow them on Twitter, they post some interesting things. That there were many pensioners that there were some that froze to death, that like literally froze to death, and people didn't have enough energy or food. So there was a shift of thinking about what's going on in Great Britain, but also I think the tipping point was Gaza. And George Galloway was, of course, very eloquent and very outspoken about it being a genocide. He was very fearless in calling it what it is, which is a genocide when you have more than 35,000 people dead, 75% of which are children and babies. And he's had many conversations on his talk show about that. So there was a shift of, I think you had a populace that was horrified at what they were seeing and the way the government was just kowtowing to the Israeli and Americans funding the weapons to Israel and Israel carrying out this genocide. What are your thoughts and what are you hearing in your districts in Birmingham and Birmingham and also in Sussex and all the different places that you go? And also about what I brought up earlier about the poverty levels of some of the people being affected economically.
Yeah, I mean, people are waking up across Britain, Tara, and poverty definitely has a big role to play in that. I mean, unfortunately, there was a huge change of consciousness in Britain with minimal suffering, but unfortunately, history just doesn't seem to work like that. I think when things are relatively okay, people listen to the establishment. They feel like they're in safe hands. But more and old age pensioners are freezing to death in their own homes. When parents can't put food on their children's tables, I mean, I think it's like 5 million children have been designated as food insecure in our country. I mean, it's a crime what's going on in our country, and when people, are in that position, they know something is very wrong, and it's not going to get better. First it was Brexit that was blamed on the evils of capitalism, the impoverishment of our class. Then it was the COVID and the lockdowns that came with it. And then it's the war in Ukraine. And people, they just cannot see a way out unless they are involved in politics and do something about it and really change. Because people are realizing that the establishment does not have their best interests at heart. And when they go through that journey, they see what's going on in Gaza. They see the genocide that's happening. They see that horrible picture of that girl hung up on a wall with her legs blown off. They see that, and they see that our government is supporting that genocide. And that's when they realize something is very, very wrong, that the politics in this country is very, very sick. And that's why people have ended up joining our party in scores. I mean, people who've never gotten involved in politics before, I'm the recruitment officer for the Workers' Party, so I have these conversations with people myself, and they tell me, well, look, Jesse, I thought politics was just for the people at the top, for the people in the smart suits and the ties to sort it all out for us. But actually, they don't have their interests. They don't have our interests at heart. And nothing's going to change until I actually stand and be counted. And so I'm actually incredibly proud of everybody who joins the Workers' Party, because to get involved in politics, Tara, I think it requires courage. People can moan till they're blue in the face about how bad the world is, but only when they have courage, they actually become happier. People who don't get involved in politics, they end up getting sad and depressed because they don't have control over their own destiny, over their own future. But when people really take the bull by the horns, they have that courage, they take a stand, acknowledging all the risks that are really involved in getting in politics. At least they take solace in the fact that they are doing everything they can to change things. And I've got to say, Tara, given the state of politics in this and where our country is headed, it's the only thing that keeps me sane.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to see. And you've been seeing a lot in Ireland. You've been seeing a lot of protests about Gaza and a lot of solidarity with Palestinians and, the genocide that's being carried out against the Palestinians. And so, the Irish have really been leading the cry to stop, for a permanent ceasefire, for all of it to stop. Now, you do have the argument about the two-state solution. I don't agree with that. I think there is no two-state solution. I think that Israel should get out. Like, that's it. Like, that the Palestinians should be allowed to their homeland and given back their homes. It's ridiculous. I had on the show Ty Hickey, Irish, actually comedian, but he's also an activist and very outspoken about Gaza. And
It's
he,
brilliant.
yeah, he is very, very brilliant. And, George has spoken about it quite eloquently as well. So are there any action-oriented marches or demonstrations that are coming up for the Workers' Party and George Galloway regarding Gaza and a ceasefire and demands for that?
So most of these demonstrations tend to happen in London. I mean, we get them in across the country. So, for instance, in Birmingham, George Galloway has been invited to a Ramadan get together at the city centre, Centenary Square, this Saturday. Unfortunately, because he is insanely preoccupied with constituency work and party work. He's unable to make it. Our comrades in Birmingham, where I'm at now, I'll be there tomorrow at Ramadan, honoring their invite, giving more of, our Muslim brothers and sisters some information about our party, and, getting them involved, and I say that this isn't just about Gaza, you should join as workers, really. Because Gaza isn't a Muslim issue, in my opinion. It's not a religious issue. It's a humanitarian issue. It's a political issue. So everybody should join the workers
Issue.
by.
I mean, Israel basically is the occupier, so yeah, actually.
Absolutely.
That's
So
why the Irish identify with it so much, because of the British
yeah.
occupation of Ireland. Yeah.
Yeah, big time. So yeah, I mean, we always, make the effort to go and build a strong party contingent for these demonstrations. We have been on the demonstrations, and we've recruited hundreds of people on the back of those demonstrations, as we are the only party in this country that's really speaking out for the Palestinian people. Um, and yeah, and events wise, we're given the sheer influx in membership after Georgia's election. I mean, just traveling back from Russia, going back to the UK to get back in the thick of party work, it was almost like organising a completely different party. I mean, the political orientation was the same, but just the sheer scale of where we are now, Tara. I mean, we're setting up groups and branches up and down the country. I mean, this is the sort of stuff. I mean, I was there in the Workers' Party when we were resuscitating it on the verge of death, where we had like 300 members left. We were about to fold. And now, in the space of just less than a year, we're looking at establishing groups and branches up and down the country. I mean, it's just absolutely staggering. The work is insane, but it's an incredibly exciting personally as a senior member of the party.
Oh, well, good. I'm glad to hear that you're, because sometimes it feels like when you do political work or organizing or anything regarding an issue, or or regarding just in general workers' rights, it feels rather endless, and sometimes like nothing's happening, and it can be kind of negative because you get pushed down and suppressed a lot by the ruling class. So it's good that people are really coming together and galvanizing, and trying to better their circumstances. I wanted to ask you a little bit about Russophobia. So we touched on it earlier. America is like insane right now with its neo-McCarthyism, and Russophobia. Thus, I'm here under political asylum. And Canada's talking about passing a law that words, things you say, can carry a life sentence. So very serious things are happening with speech in countries that normally were considered to have free speech. What are you seeing in Great Britain's response with Russophobia? Is it as rabid as it is in America? And how was your reception when you came back from Russia to Great Britain? Did you have any trouble getting back in? And were there any questions? And how did people treat you when you told them you were in Russia?
Yeah, well, I mean, I just wanted to briefly touch on your point on free speech, Tar. Actually, just yesterday, Galloway spoke against this anti-extremism bill in Parliament that's being pushed through. We have some complete psychopaths who are trying to determine what extremism is. So, unfortunately, our ruling class here in Britain is just as busy curtailing freedom of speech, but we're doing everything we can to push back. I think we're the only party that's really putting up a fight against this initiative. It's in terms of going back to Russia. I mean, I think reserve comment on going back from the airport was fine. I even went ahead and declared some sweets I bought back for my family at customs, and they took a look and they sent me on my merry way. I mean that was fine, as they should. I did nothing against my country in Russia. you know, I love Britain, and you know, I'll always put its interests first. Um, with coming back though, unfortunately, I have been, as I mentioned before, I have been targeted by the Daily Mail. The Workers' Party have preempted that. They've released a statement as they contacted George's parliamentary email. They've also contacted my former employer to try and get some dirt on me. Um, but but yeah, I mean, they're not going to find much dirt. You know, I do wear my heart on my sleeve. I do live my life honestly. I say what I mean what I say. I've got nothing to hide. Um, the, you know, MI5 can sit me down in an interview and I'll tell them exactly what I'm telling you here now. Um, so yeah, I mean, they can like write whatever they like. What I went to Russia, had a great time, met amazing people, had lovely food, took pictures with you know, people all over the world, stayed up late at night, walking the promenade. I mean, good God, don't put that on the internet. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah, you know, what's interesting is, you know, because we met each other late at night on the promenade, you know, walking because it's so well lit, it's so safe, there's no crime. It's normal to see families like walking at 11 midnight, 1 in the morning, and having late dinners and doing things like that, you know, along the Black Sea, and it was very safe, you know, and I just want to, you know, living in Russia, people have asked me. I've had more close calls in America, in American cities, than I've ever had in Russia, you know, living here for now almost a year. And I can tell you it's a lovely experience as a woman to be able to walk around at night and not have that tense fear, you know, of being robbed or, you know, whatever. Um, and you know, you don't like, even in Italy, I remember having to always be aware of pickpockets and things like that. You don't have to do that here in Russia, in the major cities. Like I'm in Moscow now, and I remember one time I dropped my bank card accidentally, didn't know it, and I was walking, and a Russian person just came running after me and getting my attention in Russian. And I was like, and they had my bank card. And I was like, well, thank you, you know. So, you know, very, very kind people. Um, I wanted to ask you about your perception when you were at the youth festival with other Russians. Did you feel there was a bias against British people, or did you feel a welcoming? What was your experience with that?
A hint of bias against me, not a hint of resentment or anything like that. I mean, the Russians are an incredibly patriotic people, but they're very inclusive about their patriotism. I mean, I really wanted to go to Russia because I also wanted to see the patriotic Russian pop singer Shaman play, and and yeah, I mean, I made a bit of a tit of myself, but you know, it was so much fun. You know, just screaming "Yeah, Rossi" with, and all the other Russians were like, you know, we've been going "Yeah, Rossi." So yeah, I mean, it was had an incredible time. And yeah, not a hint of anti-British sentiment, and also not even a hint of anti-Ukrainian prejudice. I mean, you know, I have talked to a lot of Russians about this, and they say they're honest to God, you know, a perception, collective perception of this war is that, you know, the Ukrainians are their brothers and sisters. I mean, you know, a lot of Russians just even see Ukrainians as Russian, but the situation is that, and the Russians know this very well, and Putin, I think, is quite good at communicating these things quite clearly and in a nuanced way to not only the Russian people but to people all over the world. That the Ukrainians have been led astray by a government, co-opted by, you know, this awful coalition of neo-Nazis, drug addicts, and common criminals, basically, that are all under the payroll of the West and are carrying out the imperialist ambitions of Washington. And of course, a head of state's first duty is to defend their country and their sovereignty and their people. And that is exactly the motivation behind a special military operation. And the Russians know that very well. Unfortunately, it's not the same in the West. The West um, have been made drunk on anti-Russian xenophobic hysteria. You know, I mean, we actually have a lot of Russians living in the UK, and some of them are members of the Workers' Party. And I remember meeting a Russian member of our party in a town in West Sussex in Crawley, and she was telling me how distressed she's been. Her son has been relentlessly bullied at school. She has Russian friends across the country. Their children are being bullied at school. Their friends are not talking to them anymore. They've really been demonized and for the war. And that's really the difference between, you know, the perception of war from the West and Russia. You know, Russia communicates the situation clearly and in a way that doesn't demonize people of other countries. But
Right.
unfortunately, in the West, war propaganda is a heavy dose of xenophobia and racism. Really, I mean, there's no really other way to describe it. And unfortunately, that leads our people to lose their rational faculties when looking at geopolitics. I mean, it's like in Ireland. You know, when my mother came to the UK at the height of the Troubles, you know, she got a call from a colleague at work saying, "Do you see what you bastards are doing?"
Mm.
And that's unfortunately the deleterious effect of war propaganda on society. And that's a big role of our party, by the way, is to actually speak out and challenge the war propaganda, challenge these racist and xenophobic attitudes, and see people across the world as our brothers and sisters again.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you're right, that Vladimir Putin has a very measured and good way to explain a lot of what's going on and the bigger forces behind all of it. I think the quote of the year for me, though, is when he was referring to the Western forces and he said, you know, the Western elites, basically. And he was saying, I understand it's not the American people or it's not the European people, it's the elites that want this, you know, this war and that a war against Russia. And he said, but and he talked about how, you know, they basically are living off the flesh of humans and blood and then lining their pockets with money. And he said, but the vampire's ball is over. And I thought, that's the code of the year. The vampire's ball is over.
Yeah.
Because it was kind of an amusing thing, but it's also sad because it's actually really true. The amount of bloodshed just this year alone in civilian human lives. More children have died in Gaza than in many of the wars combined just in this last few months. And it's horrific and it's grinding on. In Ukraine, you know, there was such a misunderstanding about the Donbass and how Kiev was killing its own people in the Donbass. And it's interesting how now people are seeing, the propaganda is being exposed, basically.
Yeah.
But thank you for sharing all your insights and sharing, what you're doing. And a big hug and shout out to George Galloway for all he does for humanity. He's a
Yeah.
lovely human and he's a good man. And I'm so glad he's back in power and helping the people, representing them as, he should. Um, would you leave us with some parting thoughts and then also ways people can get a hold of you, or just the Workers' Party in general and George?
Yeah, I mean, I think my only parting thought is that I agree with Putin. The vampire's ball is coming to an end. It should never have come at the cost of thousands of children's lives in Gaza. And I don't think there's a day that anybody can go through without thinking about those children. For me, it is that the poor girl mounted on the wall with her legs blown off. The best way to honor their memory is to slay these vampires, really take on our demons in our own country and do everything we can to put this nightmare to an end. That's how we honor the memory. That's how we deal with the grief of all those thousands of children in Gaza, in the Donbass. Um, that's how we cope with with the sheer human tragedy that imperialism has wreaked upon this world. So yeah, the Workers' Party, you say we're the Workers' Party of Britain. You can find us on Telegram. We have a website, workerspartybritain.org. And yeah, I mean, even if you're abroad, we'd love to hear from you, especially from our brothers and sisters who are doing everything they can to slaughter their vampires to change things in their own country.
Well, thank you. And it was lovely seeing you again and talking with you again. I felt really honored to spend time with you at the youth festival and, keep doing the wonderful work that you're doing. Thank you
Thank
everyone
you.
for tuning in. And I'm going to be on Spaces in 2 hours with Rhoda Sterling. As I mentioned, from Due Process, we're going to be talking about the weaponization of the DOJ and FBI and of Interpol, some international issues as well as US. So meet us there live on Spaces. Jesse, I hope you come back on the show again. I'd love to have you back. And to everyone watching, thank you so much and have a good night. We'll see you soon. Have a good day wherever you are.